Hi, I'm Amy Anderson with ACG Practice Partners, and I'm joined again today by Davina Isaacs, one of our senior consultants. Hi, Davina.
Hi, Amy.
Davina, one of the things that you and I were just chatting about is the frequency of discounts in aesthetic practices. And I know this is something we see over and over again, and you have some pretty strong feelings about it. So let's dive into this today and talk about discounts and why do you think so many aesthetic practices rely so heavily on running specials and offering discounts?
That's a great question, Amy. I think a lot of practices discount because it creates an immediate response. You send out a Botox special or a flash sale, and all of a sudden your calendar is filled with appointments. And
Right.
so it creates an illusion that discounting works. And often that just becomes a reactive cycle instead of a strategic one.
Mhm.
And so many practices are feeling the pressure from increased competition, especially in the non surgical realm. There's a lot of social media advertising now, there's
Mhm.
economic uncertainty. So discounting feels like the easiest lever to pull.
Mhm.
And so the problem is that over time, though, you're just really training that patient to wait for deals and specials instead of them actually valuing the expertise, their patient experience, and the true outcomes that the practice can provide.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, you're right. When we run a special, some juicy discount, it can be a fast and easy way to fill the schedule, right? We get responses, we get DMs, we get appointment requests, and we feel like we did something. We feel like we moved the mark. And there might be a time where that is the goal. We just need to get busy. We just want to get some patients through the door, but there's that danger of, are we really generating revenue? Are we generating anything profitable? Or are we just, is this a vanity metric of filling the schedule? So I think you touched on it a little bit, but like, what is the danger of constantly having some sort of special or discount running?
Yeah, I think the biggest danger is unintentionally repositioning the practice as a commodity instead of being actually a premium service.
Mhm.
In aesthetics, patients aren't just buying a syringe, they're not just buying a laser treatment, they're really buying trust, safety, judgment, artistry, and the
Mhm.
overall experience. And so when practices over discount, patients start comparing that solely on price instead
Mhm.
of the true quality of the procedure and the experience. And that typically attracts more transactional patients. It lowers the loyalty and it creates pressure to keep discounting just to maintain the volume. And
Mhm.
there's really nowhere to go from there.
Yeah. And I think we see this all the time where practices have a quarterly or semi annual special or patient appreciation event, which it does sound good and it feels good. But to your point, we're just training them to wait. If they wait a few
Mhm.
months, they're going to get a good deal. And and then again, we can maybe create some high volume sales on that day during that event. But now we're delivering these discounted services over the coming months.
Mhm.
I think any aesthetic practice at some point has lamented about the race to the bottom on pricing, particularly for neurotoxin and other injectables. It can be very difficult to charge a higher price because now consumers have this thought that it's like a X dollar per unit and they're paying for the unit and not the, as to your point, that provider expertise and experience.
Mhm.
Um, and so we've kind of done it to ourselves, right? Like unintentionally, but we've created this culture of looking for the best price. And something we have often found is the patients that come in for that discounted price, they're going to leave you for that next office, that next price, that next discount that they find blasted out there. And so we say if they come for the price, they're going to leave for the price.
Yep.
And so if that's how we're drawing them in, it's really, really hard to retain those patients.
No, I was going to add too, I most often see this in new practice startups where they're just really wanting to generate some buzz and get their name out there. So they're,
Mhm.
starting out with a lot of heavy promotions and discounts. And I always try to discourage them from doing that because once you set that precedent that you are a discount practice, it's
Mhm.
really hard to retrain the patient into valuing your expertise in the patient experience. So I really try to guide new practices away from that discounting heavily at the very beginning.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. You were just telling me about a practice that recently purchased a laser. And, again, we just want to get people in and excited about it. And so they're running like a 2-for-1 special, which,
Mhm.
heck yeah, sign me up. That sounds great. But what did you find, or what were your concerns with running that kind of promotion from the beginning?
Well, the team was so excited about this. They, wanted to treat patients. They got a new tool in their toolbox, so they were really eager to start using the energy-based device. But once I sat down and I said, we really need to look at the numbers. Let's look at the data. And as we were putting everything together, and they could see the final bottom line that we were actually losing money on every treatment, it really was an eye opener for them. And so we reconfigured how we were promoting that service.
Yeah. I think that that takes a little bit of work to drill down financially, but it's a really important exercise. And it kind of goes back to, even the fundamentals, why it's so important to know your true margins on every service you offer, because then you know how much space do you really have to discount. And it is not just the total price minus the cost of goods or the consumable. That's can be significant for some. We think about our staff time, the utilization of the room, everything that goes into it. I think that's super important to know what your actual profit margin is. And then
Mhm.
as you start running these discounts, I mean, there's sometimes we find that like we're actually like paying people to have the service, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find that more often than not when we really take a hard look at the numbers.
Yeah. So, what should practices focus on instead of discounting? What are some other strategies to fill the schedule, keep people, coming in and coming back?
Yeah, for sure. One thing, Amy, I do want to add, I don't really think discounts are inherently bad. I
Mhm.
think it's when they are undisciplined discounts is
Mhm.
when it gets to be problematic. And so I think there's a big difference between doing strategic promotions based on versus like a constant based discounting, just to try to, like I said, fill the schedule. So I think the big thing is really focusing on building value.
Mhm.
Patients are more willing to invest when they truly understand, one, what is the long term plan. You hear me talk about annual treatment plans all the time,
Yeah.
but also what can they expect as an outcome. Also, the provider's expertise. We need to always be credentialing our providers. And why are they actually recommending the procedure or the products that they're recommending? I find
Mhm.
that practices that truly focus on education, giving a
Mhm.
good quality consultation, the patient experience, the relationship building. I know last time we talked about being a proactive in your follow ups and recall, really goes a long way to retain patients much better than the practices competing purely on price.
Mhm. Absolutely. I love what talk about with education, and really that education starts with knowing what the concerns are, right? That we're not selling a product, right? We're not just this retail organization that you're going in and shopping and pulling something off the shelf. It's starting with, well, tell me what concerns you, right? You're asking for XYZ treatment. You're asking for this BBL laser, or you're asking for a chemical peel or an injectable. Let's get away from the solution first and focus primarily on what the concerns are. And then you match the solution to the problem. And it's less now about price. It's more about this problem area that bothers me. Right now, I'm getting to the emotional part of it. This bothers me. You now have something that you think can make it better. Great. I now trust you. You've identified the issue. You have a plan for me. I'm willing to pay for that. Yeah, of course, I still have a budget. I'm not saying that money doesn't matter at all, but I'm less concerned about, but will I get 15% off, right? I'm more now invested in you, this provider who understands me and who created a plan for where my concerns are.
Absolutely. When patients see the big picture, they stop evaluating treatments as just one transaction at a time. So instead of them saying, do I want to spend money on filler today? It becomes more of a, hey, this is part of my long term treatment plan for correction, prevention, maintenance, and really quality or confidence that they're seeking. And it's a huge psychological shift. It changes aesthetics from impulse spending into more intentional self care when they truly know what the journey looks like.
I love that. So, what would you say practices misunderstand about patient retention?
I think a lot of practices focus heavily on attracting new patients and they unintentionally neglect the ones that they already have. And so retention is almost always more profitable than acquisition. And so patients who truly feel cared for, they feel educated, they feel remembered, and they feel like they're guided in the correct decision making over time spent, they stay longer, they refer more, they're just all around more loyal. And so you're not constantly chasing new leads if you're really taking exceptional care of the patients already in your ecosystem.
Mhm. That's so true, and I agree that, we would want practices to really focus a lot more on the retention side. Acquisition is important. We do need new patients, especially when we've got capacity on the schedule, but that shouldn't outweigh the focus on retaining patients and keeping those loyal ones coming back. I think you make a great point about they really are more profitable over time, and even we think about our treatment times. You may not require the same amount of time on your schedule because you know them. It's not a full consultation necessarily every time. It's a quick update on what's going on, what's changed, reconfirming the treatment plan. And for those of us who maybe we're loyal, I think many of us are loyal to our hairstylist,
Oh
maybe
yeah.
our nail tech. We think of all these other relationships we have, and this is really like this is the goal, that we're viewed with that same level of trust and continuity. I don't know about you, but there's only one person who's blonding my hair these days, and I'm not going to be enticed away to somebody else who's running a special because I trust her. And
Mhm.
the potential of it going wrong and looking bad, like I'm not willing to take that risk.
Me either.
Perfect. Well, always so helpful to talk with you, Davina, about patient retention, building aesthetic practices. Any final takeaways that you want to leave our listeners with who are maybe struggling with discounting or wanting to move forward, based on this information and on a new path?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing I want people to take away is there's so many different ways to retain patients, fill your schedule that doesn't involve discounting. I think it starts with an exceptional consultation, truly spending the time to understand the patient, what their goals, what their concerns are, and what their capacity is resource wise. We have time and money, and, providing very thoughtful, strategic follow ups, building those customized annual treatment plans, providing educational content, perhaps having a VIP event, membership experiences, really strong patient communication. And really, it takes kind of all of those pieces to come together to create the really strong puzzle. And so patients remember how you make them feel. And so luxury isn't always about great furniture or the champagne toast, but it's really about feeling cared for and, knowing that you're guided in the right direction.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for this today, Davina. Until next time.